Hi everyone, welcome to Data Umbrella's webinar. I'm Beryl Kanali, and today we have Fabian who's going to talk to us about blockchain. So I'm going to do a bit of introduction about Data Umbrella, then I will introduce our speaker today, and then at the end we'll open up for question and answer. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube in the next 24 to 48 hours. Data Umbrella is a community for underrepresented persons in data science, and we are a nonprofit organization. We have a team under Data Umbrella who work together to put these events out for you. So today I'm the one who's going to be presenting, but we have other 4 individuals who volunteer to help us get the materials and information out to our community members. We have a code of conduct, and we thank you for helping make this a welcoming and friendly community for all. You can support us in various ways. So one is by following a code of conduct so that we can help make this a collaborative space. You can also share our events with others. And then you can contribute to us through open source, since today Fabian is going to touch on open source as well. So we have video timestamps. We have a new website that you're working on. We have a sprint website. We do open source sprint websites. We have a blog, and we have an events board. All these are open source, and if you have any skills that have been listed, you can check out our GitHub page, which is Data Umbrella, and you can find ways in which you can contribute to the open source stuff there. You can also donate to a nonprofit. We are on Open Collective as Data Umbrella, and we're also on Benevity, which is a company matched platform where if you donate $10, your organization matches the same. We also have a YouTube channel. We have all our videos from our recent events. This included are posted there. You can go there and check out different content. We have playlists on career advice, data visualization, contributing to open source, scikit-learn, PyMC, and NumPy. We also have a monthly newsletter. So we release our newsletter once a month, and our newsletter is hosted on Substack. So you can go to Substack, that is dataumbrella.substack.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. We also have our website. So our website has different resources like links to conferences, open source, burnout, AI ethics, and more. We are on all social media platforms. Meetup is where you can join our community and get events. We host 2 events per month. We are also on Twitter, LinkedIn, and GitHub is where you can contribute to open source or learn how you can contribute to open source. We also have a job board. So for those interested in jobs in open science, data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, we have partners who post jobs there, so you can take a look as well. On this webinar, we have a live captioning button. So on the top of your screen, we have a button labeled CC. If you feel the need to use it, you can use it during the presentation. We have an online suggestion box. So this online suggestion box is where you can leave suggestions for future event topics, feedback on this event, technical issues in case of any feedback. In September, we have 2 events. So we have an event on overview of information security, and then we also have another event on debugging in Python. So you can head down to Meetup, where you can join our Data Umbrella community or Data Umbrella Africa community. When we post the events, you can get to RSVP and join us. So on today's talk, we have Fabian Owuor, who's going to be presenting on blockchains for open source solutions. A little bit about Fabian. Fabian is a highly experienced software developer with an impressive career spanning over 3 decades. He possesses a wealth of expertise, both as a product and project manager and a developer, with over 2 decades of experience working for digital agencies. His core languages are Laravel, PHP, React, and JavaScript. And in the past year, he has delved into the exciting realm of blockchain projects. focusing on IOTA, Ethereum, and Celo. You can find him on GitHub and LinkedIn. I'm going to share these slides on the handout section, so feel free to connect with Fabian on LinkedIn and GitHub to check out what he's been working on. And with that, I will now hand over to Fabian, who's going to take us through his talk. Welcome, Fabian.
Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. I'd like to start this just 1 minute. Let me get these slides. Okay. I hope you can all see the screen. Now, today, I'd like to take you guys through a little thinking exercise about looking at the possibility of using blockchain as open source. I don't want to make this I don't want to make this talk too technical, but we're going to go through a description of what blockchain is in sort of its key elements, and then we'll be able to proceed into more descriptions of where we can implement them. So as mentioned, sorry, this slide, this is, as mentioned, so my name is Fabian Owuor. I'm a Web3 developer. I'm also trying to be an entrepreneur. I should hopefully know in the next couple of years. And based in Nairobi, Kenya. And my fascination for blockchain started, I guess, early in 2013, but I didn't really do much about that until 2022, where I began to start thinking of how to basically deploy this technology and use it for specific advantages. One of the things about me also is that I've always been focused in community applications. Previously, I was building medical platforms and platforms that are focused to sort of help local communities. So my main focus has always been a way to use technology and communication to make people's lives better. Blockchain sort of provided a new sort of shift how that could be implemented. And these are some of the things that I'd like to share with you today. As we go along, I guess I'll just go through the entire presentation, then we can do a Q&A at the end. I've not done this a lot, so I'm not good at gauging time, but I guess Beryl will advise where if we go over time or anything. Now, I'm going to look at this conversation also from a specific mindset. It's something that's really big to my heart right now. And one of the projects that we are currently working on is looking at it. And this is basically empowering youth using Web3, and especially unemployed youth. And one of the key things for me that is really a big change, I was also once a teenager. And I imagine my teenage life and compare it against today's teenagers. We are loading so much in terms of responsibility that they really can't handle or solve. So we're finding situations where 20-year-olds are more depressed than 80-year-olds. And I think that's a wrong way that of life. Life shouldn't be that way. So we have an opportunity to try and give them a little more hope, but also give them tools where they can start figuring out how they can take part in solving some of the problems that we are sort of putting on their shoulders. Early January in 2023, we started thinking about how we could help startups more. I've been working with startups for over 10 years now. In the last 2 to 3 years, especially after COVID, I needed to change sort of my perspective. So what I then started thinking about was looking for online resources and looking towards small businesses to sort of understand how things worked within our environment in Kenya and also outside in the world. One of the key lessons that I've gotten in terms of, how SMEs work is that you have three distinct types of SMEs. So you've got startups, and startups are organizations, or not yet organizations. They are entities that are trying to become organizations and trying to figure out a repeatable model and a recurring income, and also identify things like their customers. When you look at innovations, and there's one specific case I like looking at, there's a guy called Richard Turere. Richard Turere invented a LED light that could scare away elephants. And I like using his as an example because Turere's innovation could have been structured in such a way that he could earn a lifetime revenue from his innovation. I'm not sure about the details of the project, but what usually happens to local innovators within Africa, they get paid one lump sum, and usually that's the end of it. So for them, it might be a lot of money, but if you look at it in a legal way, it might not have been the best deal for them. Then there's the tested business models. You want to sell tomatoes, you'll sell tomatoes in exactly the same way. You could variate it in terms of who you target. You could try and sell tomatoes maybe to the old and sick who are not able to leave their houses, in which case you deliver to them. So this has a new paradigm to it, but it's an old model that still exists. I like using some of these proverbs because there's a Kenyan proverb that refers to and says the strength of a crocodile is in the water when it is upright. So if you flip a crocodile upside down out of the water, it's a powerful, useless animal. And it's not within its niche, so there's not much it can do. And I think this is a key lesson, especially when you're looking at developing SMEs, because that niching is very key. If you try and solve too many problems, or you try and solve too big problems, you generally do not have the resources, the people, or the capacity to be able to handle that. So focusing on niche markets is a very key thing that small businesses need to do. Now, looking at the current situations, in January of 2023, we did a very experimental survey. We took 60 to 90 unemployed young people within Nairobi, and we ran a survey, just trying to figure out why these people are sitting at home unemployed and are not even imagining to start businesses. Now, some of the key three things that we found was that, one, they have an absolute fear of taxes. The taxman is like something to be scared about. They just don't understand how it works, and they feel that the taxman is someone who comes to shut down businesses or threaten you during the day. They also have a fear of failure. Unfortunately, most of these kids have grown up and forgotten that from when they were toddlers, the way they learned anything, the way they learned how to walk, how to talk, was through trying and failing. So it's a continuous step of trying and failing, and that's what helps us get there. And the last thing was financial insecurity. Most of them were imagining that to start a small business, they need at least $10,000. And this isn't true, but this is what's in their minds. And this is why some of them are sitting at home doing nothing, because when they think about the options of going outside there, what has been fed inside their minds is completely the wrong view. So with this in mind, one of the things that sort of happened at the same time is I started now trying to figure out how to build blockchain solutions, but also build them in terms of how I can connect them to society. Now, for most of you who may have heard of blockchain but don't know what it is, so blockchain basically allows us to store information. Instead of in one place, we store it in many places. So if you think about you having 10 computers, when you're storing a set of data that you're interacting with, you'll be able to store a copy on every single machine that you have. So every single one of those 10 machines is going to be able to store a copy of that data. And additionally, there are other things that are used to link those stored files, but that means, one, you have a very efficient way in case of failure on one of your computers. But also, if any incident occurs in one computer, the backups of the other computers has legitimate copies of the files. I'll just jump on to the next slide. So, as I said, I don't want to take this too. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so I was talking about blockchain in terms of being blocks. So blocks are the contained lists of data that are connected through each node. And I was saying each node, just think of a node as a single computer that's storing data. The data is grouped into blocks and also stored in nodes. And then we have something called a hash, which is basically a mathematical set of numbers and letters that is used to connect each data bit that is stored from one node to the next. There are maybe 3 sections to that hash. Again, I wouldn't go in depth into that, but that is basically used to, that is how each of the 10 computers that are linked to each other is able to know that this one is linked to the next, is linked to the next. Then decentralization also just means that we're using multiple storage points, which is good for redundancy, but also if any changes may occur within 1 or 2 machines, we have backups across multiple machines. Immutability, I was describing when I think everything disappeared. This basically ensures that no changes are done without some sort of coordinated plan across all nodes, but it generally works to and against. But look at it in terms of what we're discussing, it's a good thing to have a set of computers that it's hard to change things, because that helps us in terms of security. Then open source is basically implemented in terms of the transparency and the fact that if you innovate on products, you're generally invited to share them with everyone. So everything is always open to the whole community, and we can keep developing it as a group. Now, when we look at open source, I guess one of the keywords that comes is collaboration. And this has also been one of the key things throughout our human history, people working together. If you think about traditional African homes, there was someone standing around the fences so that the lions don't come in and kill everyone else. There was people with fires outside who'd sleep at night to keep the lions at bay. So that collaboration is what we are now extending to technology so that we can work together. And again, I look at things like community, because one, the diversity, the inclusiveness of bringing people together for the improvement of society. And then transparency, we have things like GNU licenses that means that the technology is developed and is available for all to change as they please. And usually we hope that the technology is being built for good. Interoperability, a word I think I'll never get used to, is about open standards and protocols. And you can look at interoperability as operating from, this is what has allowed us to do things like callbacks on mobile networks. This is what has allowed us to connect things like the internet so that computers can communicate to each other through TCP/IP. This is how the web communicates through things like HTML. So that interoperability is something we've been implementing since the early days, from radio waves to internet. And now we're beginning to see its implementation in blockchain. And mainly because if you think about the way something like a blockchain like Ethereum or Celo, which are types of blockchains, they are built in such a way that they're separate. And yes, we may call them running on smart contracts, but these contracts are usually locked within themselves. And this is the references that you usually hear people say on-chain. Now, off-chain refers to things that are not on the chain. So we're going to look at something in front, which I call an oracle. That oracle is what is able to connect smart contracts to the outside world. So if I'm jogging, for example, and I have a watch on my hand, I can collect data from this watch and pass it on to a smart contract. I'll use something like an oracle. So I can delve into this at a later point, but I sort of wanted to introduce that so you have it in your minds and we'll be able to look at that. So now, we're going to look at African progress in terms of those 4 areas: community, transparency, interoperability, and accessibility. So getting the community together, creating transparent solutions that everybody can see what's being done, nothing's hidden, and connecting different communities. So we might be solving a problem here and there, but the fact that we're able to connect people together means that we could solve another problem just by that connectivity. And then accessibility, providing these technologies for everyone to get. On a history of blockchain, I think there's an article I did a week or 2 ago for one of my lessons. It's something, if you guys want further reading on this, it can give you a good background, but I'll just cover it sort of in summary here. So one of the first attempts at digital money was something called DigiCash. Now, DigiCash failed because of they went bankrupt, and also they had very little low adoption. If you look at the point where DigiCash came up with this idea, it was a point where people did not yet even know that this is something they're going to need. So there was not much interest in it. Then eGold came up, and eGold got stuck up in things like money laundering and legislation, mainly because there were a lot of underground people using it for transactions. So criminals are innovative in the sense that they learn to use some technologies faster than the rest of us. But what then happens is it brings a problem for most innovators, because if these are your early adopters, you're going to have the cops more or less behind you. Bitcoin got wide adoption, but this is one of the reasons why you may never or will never really know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Because had he been visible and we know who he is, the chances are right now he'd either be in jail or he'd be explaining a lot of legal things to various governments in terms of the adoption of Bitcoin. And we wouldn't have focused on the technology, we would have focused on the personality of who he is. So there's a strong reason as to why they may not want to be known, whether they or he or she, and the focus should be on the technology. Then we're also going to look at in front, and where I want to say all this is headed is what I call decentralized living. There's something that happens to human society when we develop energy, transport, and communication. And this is something that I've picked from a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Rifkin. And he talks a lot about it, and we're going to explore it much later. And I think we are about at this point where we'll be able to start seeing mass adoption of blockchain technology for good uses and creating big changes in people's lives. Now, scaling issues. There's a reason why we're not yet at mass adoption. If you think about the case of DigiCash, they had sort of the similar problem, but at a worse level. There's a writer called Francis Fukuyama, and he talks about the social virtues and the creation of prosperity. In essence, what he's saying is that societies that improve because there's trust. I don't have to give you a written contract to do business with you. We will do it as a formality, but you know well enough that once we've shaken hands on an agreement we have, I'll deliver my part and you'll deliver your part. Most societies where things can happen on a handshake tend to succeed more than societies where things are not happening on handshakes. If everyone is a crook out to get the other, there's usually less development in such societies. The next sort of thing I wanted to think about also, again, these are human things, and there's I think I'd call her an anthropologist and a historian. She was called Margaret Mead. And one of the things she defined as a point in civilization. So where does civilization start? Civilization starts when you find a healed adult human femur, because that means at that period of time, if you are hurt badly, the chances are you'd be eaten by something. But the fact that you had a bone that healed, there was someone else who took the time, or other people who took the time to feed you, to take care of you until your leg bones healed. I think it's a very profound statement, and it's one of the things that we need to sort of look at as we go ahead. Then Scaling issues also, we need to think about things like regulation. We've reached a point where blockchain technology implementations, a lot of them being cryptocurrencies and exchanges, people now are being advised to put their money into cold wallets or wallets that they physically control, because the trust of most exchanges is starting to be shaking after all the things we've seen happening with some of the big company collapses. And every so often, there's something new that we are seeing, which is giving us a little worry. So, yes, we know that regulation needs to come in, but the regulation needs to focus on reducing fraud, not limiting innovation. Because if we limit the innovation, then what's going to happen is we're not developing the technologies. So the chances are the frauds may start increasing, or because there's no innovation, the movement that we need to do to make the technology easier to use may not happen. There's a new phenomenon in blockchain that people are calling now smart contract wallets. Right now, if you have a blockchain wallet, the chances are you've got 12 words that you need to remember. And then you've got a private and public key, which sometimes you'll end up confusing. And if you send the wrong one, of course, you've just given away most of your money. And the challenge also becomes that when you lose your private key, you may not be able to access your wallet ever again. There are cases of people who've lost millions and millions of assets worth of financial assets, and they are not able to access their wallets. So the smart contract wallets are going to work in a different way. But the key thing to remember, it's going to be easier for the user to maybe access these wallets by either a normal 4-digit PIN or a username and password, depending on the implementations that will be done. Now, some of these technologies, as start being implemented, you're going to start seeing mass adoption, and you're going to see more people starting to run to use the platform, because one of the challenge we have as developers, whether we are using Linux or blockchain, we sort of make everything hard for everyone else to use. But slowly, some of us come back together and say, we need to include more people into these platforms, so we need to start making it easier for other people to use. So the technology is becoming easier to use. We had covered this a bit, and one of the articles also I shared recently was talking about connecting oracles to prophets. Now, prophets were advisors. We're going to see again when we're talking, as we reach towards the end of this presentation, one of the links that I feel also we are collecting from the past of Africa, which is fear. But oracles were advisory. They'd look at things in life now and be able to foretell what the future is. So what oracles do, smart contracts, as I said, are locked within the chain. So what an oracle does, an oracle will pick real life data, and we're going to see some projects that we're already looking at. And with this real life data, then it will be able to send these to the blockchain. And this means that now we can pick your heart rate and store it in the blockchain. We can pick your temperature and store it in the blockchain. We can pick the specific information about things like climate and store that on the blockchain. And we can start using also these oracles to sort of analyze and give data that we can make decisions with. Okay, now I want to use the next set of slides to sort of look at some of the things that we are actually trying to implement. There are few images I didn't want to use because some of them are quite disturbing. And if you look at some of the things that I try and talk about, one of the reasons that I'm trying to work on blockchain and these platforms is that it's about time we change the African story. Right now, there are videos that if you look online show you about how mining is still done in Africa. They're using 5, 6, 7-year-old children working in rainy conditions in the mud, being pushed around by grown-ups. And this is how we are mining the minerals and valuable things that are being used to build some of the technologies that we have. So for me, it's not just an issue of just outrage, but how do we start thinking of how to prevent that from happening? We need to get into these mines, talk with these governments, start financing these mines in a better way, and then build structures where now we can get grown-ups to actually do the mining and use some excess money to ensure that more of these children are going into schools, and then they can make their own decisions in life and at least lead better lives. But every single day, Kenya, not just Kenyans, Africans are walking over tons of minerals that are going to be mined. They don't directly benefit from them, and in most cases, they end up being misused to mine them, and then these go all outside. So one of the projects that we've been doing as a class study, which now is going to become a project its own, is looking at tokenized mining. We're starting with gold, but the aim is to extend this across every single imaginable mineral. And why we want to do this is because if we can get these mines fast, crowdfunded by the public, then we can get the public to start investing in things like gold in a new way that they've not been doing. Most of the public buys gold as an end product. Now, if you can invest 1,000 shillings, which is $10, into gold, and in 6-7 months when it's mined, or 1 year, you get a 5 times return, which means you get $50. This could be very key for individuals, but it also means that if we can get communities investing $10,000, $20,000, they can be able to get some decent revenue. And there might be questions as to where they'll get $10,000. Those we'll start figuring out. But the key concept is that now we can involve them in the mining process, and now we can start improving the lives of people who live around some of these mines. I wanted to give an example of Kakamega, which has always had gold. My parents give me stories the way they would run from school, go to Kakamega for about 2 weeks to collect some gold, because there was gold all over, lying all over the place. But if you look at the communities, even the last 60 years, none of them are really benefiting, from the gold that's been mined within their communities. So through tokenized mining, we'll be able to provide them a way to start realizing some revenue, and in the process ensure that their children can actually get the education they need by either passing on a percentage of profit through other tokens we can create or various channels. The next thing, if you look at that image of food, I don't know what that food is called in English. In my local language, we call it mito, which is MITO. It is a delicacy of ours that we boil for a very long time and then keep adding milk, and it sweetens as it gets along the way. I'm not exactly sure. Chefs can advise how long they last and everything, but there's a huge tradition of African recipes that are disappearing because no one's really interested in them. We've got too much chips and chicken and fish and chips and all sorts of food available now that we are not looking at some of these recipes and how we can make them. Now, for us, it's how can we preserve these recipes and be able to do various things? And usually you find that the ideas come from different places. So if you all know Mr. Beast, he set up Mr. Beast Burger. I think it ended up shutting down because of health reasons. I've not yet read through that story, just had a summary of it. But what he was doing was very interesting, because if we take African recipes and we put these on the blockchain, and we're going to be taking these African recipes from your grandmother's family, which means it's a family recipe, so you can make a revenue from it, and we give it to a chef to mix it up into something interesting. Another problem, what we're doing with local chefs, Kenyans turn them into cooks. So you basically have a chef who keeps making the same beef stew and rice, tomorrow chapati and chicken, but they're not using their skills to actually take the recipes and make something new out of it, or even something unique. Now, if we can get these chefs all together, we get all these recipes in one place. And each of these chefs then starts looking at creating unique recipes, which then they can license down to other chefs. We can expand these chefs' reach in an instant of 1 week across East Africa. So most of the chefs in East Africa can start making his recipe or her recipe in a way that the chef would be able to make a revenue out of that particular recipe. A certain percentage then is passed back to the owner of the recipe, and we have basically a three-way system where the owner of the recipe, the chef who creates the recipe, who expands on the recipe, and the other chefs who are reselling the recipe are all making some money out of it. And for the public, they have new African cuisines that they can try out. So this would be an interesting project. It's currently just a thought project. We've not started looking at anything about it, but this means we can change how also we look at chefs from being cooks to actually people who take recipes and make them interesting for the rest of us to eat. Hawkers is also another interesting place. This hawking, I think, has not been innovated in many years. That image there is a lady carrying mangoes. It's a very common image in Africa. Now, the problem with a lot of small businesses in Africa is that they really run inefficiently. You'll find this lady, for example, is a CEO, but she's going to work with these fruits for 30 minutes to 45 minutes, go and sell them in a market somewhere, then walk back again. Now, what if we could give them online decentralized markets that they can be able to sell right outside their home? The easiest thing for them was to set up a shed somewhere near their home, and they can put up their fruits, and we don't have to build very elaborate delivery systems because we've got people with bicycles at home. We've got an excess of things like motorcycles. And rather than these motorcycles riding empty every single time, when they go to pick up customers and they drop, they're most likely going back empty. We could use that as delivery points, which are affordable for some of these local rural business people. And then we can see how to maybe extend this with tokens. So the idea is to make their time more efficient. If we can cut down the time that this lady works with from 40 minutes going to the market and 40 minutes coming back, that's another 2 hours to her day. And this means that they can start concentrating most of their time on financial economic activities and spending also more time within their homes, with their families, or with their children. So there's a potential, I believe, that can be done to improve the lives of hawkers and remove them again from the streets where they're constantly fighting with local councils and various other people running and trampling over their things. The next project is something I've been doing for the last couple of months. Now, there's a company based out of Japan. They're called QBII. And QBII is looking at connecting machine-to-machine payments. I'll describe it in a way that makes it easy to understand. So what we want to do with QBII is, if you look at your house and think of the implementation basically within a rural setting. So I have my solar panels at home. Once my battery is fully charged, what happens to all the sun that I'm getting on my solar panel? It gets wasted. Now, if we can get my solar panel to talk to my neighbor's solar panel and be able to send extra energy to them, then what I can also be able to do is put like a bill on that amount so that I know I sent you 1,000 shillings worth of electricity yesterday, and yesterday I sent you 500, and then we can do like some sort of accounting so that the machines can pay themselves, but they can also keep sharing energy. And in rural Africa, that works pretty well because whether you're still living amongst your relatives, the chances are the next house is your brother or your cousin, and you can start sharing resources, but also passing out various things. For the urban dwellers, it becomes interesting because now every single device in your house can get a quota of electricity. When the allocation for your TV is done, the TV can power off on its own. Everything else will still remain alight. The TV will switch on again tomorrow from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. because that's the time that you want it to be able to run. This also creates some safety situations because what if you left the iron box on? The iron box is automatically triggered to switch off at 8 a.m. in the morning. So it might get hot because you left it running for 30 minutes, but it's not going to burn down the house. So it has a lot of implementations. And whether we look at distributed electricity, the other implementations we want to use it, for example, is on sensors. If we're going to do fractional farming well, if you're going to own a goat in Mandera or 3 goats in Mandera, you need to know whether the goats are alive, how their temperature is doing, and where they are. And you're going to use IoT sensors to do this. So we can be able to track their locations, but most of all with these IoT sensors, we can tell you the temperature of your goat, and we can tell you 2 of your goats have a high temperature because they're pregnant. That's something for you as an investor to celebrate about. So there are certain sets of things that we'll be able to start doing within the African setting and be able to improve on farmers' lives. Now, I mentioned something there about Pro Box bandits. I guess for Toyota manufacturers, that might not be a good thing to do. But what has happened within this country is a lot of crime cases involving stolen goods is involving Toyota Pro Boxes. So they usually come outside people's homesteads, put the goats inside the cars and disappear with them. So people usually refer to them as Pro Box bandits. So it has nothing to do with the car. It is just human behavior. Then we've talked about the efficiency of small businesses. And again, we're going to see how this is usually a problem, because if you think about rural households, again, I was in my rural home in 2021, and I spent some time also just hanging out with people and figuring out how they live within a rural setting most of the time. And you find it's a completely different life set, because some rural women are spending close to 4 hours each day. So they're going to wake up at 5 a.m. They'll walk for 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours, depending on how far the water source is, walk back, which means they spend 2 hours in the morning, another 2 hours in the afternoon. That's 4 hours every day. This is just to collect water. And in a world where we've got the technology to pipe the water, we've also got the technology to pass energy, put energy to push out the water. People are still losing 4 hours every day. Now, if we can turn these people's lives around, we can turn it by taking those 4 hours and making them do things that are more economical for themselves. And things like pumping water becomes something you can do. What does it take to get them pumped water? It is maybe a cement tank or a central tank located amongst the family, and piped water and some energy source to do, which we have things like solar. Again, machine-to-machine payments is going to come in here to be able to distribute not just the electricity usage, but where it needs to go to. So all excess electricity can be sent to the central water tank to help pump water during the day for people. The next is social interactions. Now, again, when I was home, I spent about a year or 2 growing trees and raising dogs. But one of the things I learned is that as we usually assume that rural people are not that educated and they depend on us quite a bit, I learned a thing or two from them. And one of the things was that if you're growing trees, especially our rural place has very, very large termites. So one of the things you need to do is surround the tree with ash that comes from burning firewood. You just collect some of it and put it around the trees. And that's like a natural pesticide. It's going to be too bitter for the termites. This is information that's readily available. But you'll find we still push very expensive solutions to rural folk on things that they already know and that they can implement in a very easy way. So there's a key thing about being able to give these guys decentralized communication channels where they can change information, where they can start talking about the various tools that they have. And some of the knowledge they know could actually be patented and could earn them money. But we need to start looking at some of these things differently and realize where we can take it. Now, again, I'll just come here sort of to summarize again on machine-to-machine learning. One of the projects QBII is working on is based in Brazil. And the idea is to use cars to be able to read temperature and climate, let's say climate settings on the road. So you have cars that are passing a road point every single day. So we can start reading data, picking data of the temperature whenever that car passes by. And there's always cars passing by. So we can read the temperature at almost every single period of time of the day. And these are small implementations that will then help us start understanding what's going on with our climate. How can we start solving things so that, and this is one of the things I was saying, let's not put it on the weight of our young kids that the climate is changing and we start giving them a way to be able to see what it is that we can implement to start changing things. And they each just need to do something small. Someone puts in a tracker, another one will put in something that analyzes, and together we'll have a bigger network of services and products that can be able to help us save our environment or secure our environment. On this slide, I'd like to just talk about Rifkin a bit. Now, it's a key thing that he talks about. 3 technologies usually converge to manage the power and move economic life more efficiently. Communication, conversation, and stories manage activities, mobility, moving activities, and energy to power activities. So whenever we've seen these 3 technologies come together, there's been a great shift from the period of the printing press to the car, electricity, candles, whenever these 3 things sort of merge together. And I believe that right now, Rifkin talked of a distributed communication and energy transport, but now we're going to a decentralized one. The young people you're seeing around you today don't care much about ownership. They're not looking for the next big car or the next big house. They are gladly happy to share a house, 5, 6 of them, and live in a way that they are sharing things together. So they're going to redefine sort of that sharing economy. And from that will come sort of like decentralization. And once we can connect those 3 technologies, that will also be one of the 3 things that leads to mass adoption of blockchain. Again, this for me is a personal theory, but I think it's a strong one, and I'll be proven wrong or right in future. So the 2 numbers you see before you, there are 53 million rural people in Kenya, and there are 3 million unemployed people in Kenya. This has been one of the things that we are trying to solve and answer. And the next slide, what usually shocks me sometimes is that Kenya has 4,000 unemployed doctors, and yet we have people who are dying every day because they can't access doctors. So the problem is the way we are thinking. We are always thinking that a doctor must operate within a hospital. No, a doctor can operate even by visiting patients. What they need is a way to get paid, and the patients need a way to be able to afford the doctor's services or be able to link the 2 together, and it doesn't have to be in a hospital. So if we can start thinking away from those sort of rigid ways, we can start creating doctors who travel door to door and are able to treat patients. We can have hospitals that are layered in different sort of models where you have maybe non-operating hospitals and you have full theaters and hospital centers where people can get an operation. Of course, if you're going to be operated on, you need a clean environment. So it's not going to happen in your house. But if you have a small cut, it can be disinfected and bandaged in your house. So that doesn't need you going around. So we could start figuring out, for example, using nurses who live around the neighborhood. Because if doctors are unemployed, if you use the doctor's location to give them access to patients, then we can start sorting some of these problems out. And one of the things we want to try and look at is token-based rewards to encourage people to take drugs. You realize this after you deal with maybe very young or very old people. I think in the middle, we're usually kind of quite strict and we know we need to take our medicine. But maybe you have a malaria drug that needs 4 doses. And you need to encourage people to actually take those 4 doses, because sometimes if they don't, malaria, not treated well, moves to the brain and becomes more serious. So if we can do token-based rewards, we can be able to encourage people to actually take their medication. Tokenized hospitals, Right now, we depend on the government to build these hospitals. But what if we look at hospitals in terms of decentralized units that could, one, be funded by individuals within those communities, but even individuals from outside. So Fabian, who earns a lot of money, can invest X amount of shillings into his rural community, get the community to also raise that amount. Maybe some corporates also invest money in that. The aim is not to build a high-end operating hospital, but the aim is to build something that has enough tools and equipment to be able to save lives. There's still a lot of cases of people who are ending up dead because the hospital is 40, 60, or 2 hours away for something which, if the hospital 15 minutes away, they could have been saved. Then this would also look at things like decentralized funding. So we're looking at spreading that funding from the community to corporates to even people outside the country who are interested in sort of being a part of helping these local community figure out their health and management. Now, tokenized health services would also look at, one, trying to spread those tokens so that treatment is distributed. But one of the key other problems we have, especially in Kenya, so a lot of Kenyans have medical insurance. What they don't usually realize is that you might have medical cover worth 2 million shillings. If you get hospitalized and that 2 million runs out in 2 weeks because the hospitals are quite expensive to sleep in and also surgeries, so what's going to happen usually is that the private hospitals may, depending on who you are, move you very quietly to a public hospital. But remember, the problem here is your medical data is usually held by an insurance company or hospital somewhere that's not willing to share that data with a public hospital. So you lie in a public hospital and find that someone died 2 days later. Why? Because their data was stuck somewhere and there was a whole lot of politics going on so that it could be shared somewhere to save his life or her life. So these are things that we can be able to fix at a very easy and rudimentary level by having people have control of their own data. So if I go to Uganda and I fall unconscious, the doctor just needs to access my data, which I may have given access to my spouse or my siblings or my relatives, and they can share that data with the doctor and save my life, as opposed to it being stuck and being a fight about who should own the data of the patient. So I think there's a huge potential within not just treatment, but even how data is handled. And we could use these solutions across blockchain. Now, this is a project we're looking at right now. I think they're still trying to finish the series. I can't also give much information about this yet, but basically, we are trying to see, if you look at movie budgets in the West and Europe, America, they are usually in their 20 and 30 millions of dollars. Most movie budgets in Africa are doing $25,000 to $70,000. Of course, you can see our Nigerian neighbors get quite creative, especially with their graphics. It still makes for an entertaining movie, but imagine if we could give them 100 times that budget. What could happen to the level of production? What could happen to the type of movies? Because I think the African story is already there. What they need now to do is get better graphics, and they'd be able to start competing on a worldwide base. So we want to try and use crowdfunding to start funding some of this filmmaking. We're going to start with 1 or 2 series, and if that is successful, now start working with more filmmakers in Kenya and eventually outside of Kenya to start seeing how we can expand movie making, not just to increase the number of people who can get access to this funding, but also start expanding their filming sets. Next is sports. For those of you who know me, you know I'm an avid cyclist. I used to cycle a lot when I was young, then I stopped, then I started again. And cycling is just an exciting thing because you get to see things that you don't usually see. But one of the challenges that exists for African cyclists and Kenyan cyclists, the average professional bike to get to Tour de France is about $10,000 to $14,000. That costs more than most family cars. So imagine the conversation. 20-year-old goes to their parents and says, I'd like to do professional cycling and I need to buy a bike that costs 10,000 euro. That conversation isn't happening. And then you find most professional cyclists can't go beyond a certain level. And this is a very sad thing. And we see this not just in cycling, this is across all sports. And unfortunately, there's nowhere else for them to turn to. And they end up in a situation where they have to take jobs they don't like. And this is part of what we feel is also causing the frustration, because these guys would, or these girls would rather be on bicycles, racing, riding all over the place. We are putting them into office jobs. So we want to look at how to start getting these communities together, starting with cycling, connect NFTs, and encourage insurance companies to start thinking about different insurance products. One of the problems we have in Kenya is that a bicycle is treated as part of your household. So the insurance covers your bike as part of your seats. It's insured. So if it's stolen in the house, you will be paid. If it's stolen outside, it's treated as something different. This we feel is very wrong, because you're riding that bike outside. And if it's worth 10,000 euro, if someone finds out that cost, then they may try to steal it. So the insurance needs to look at individual bikes. We want to link each bike to an NFT and then be able to get insurance to create new insurance products, and further link that to device tracking and also maybe things like locks, and eventually bring the whole community together so we can start raising, funds to try and get maybe 2 or 3 cyclists in the start, but eventually get more cyclists, an ability to be able to race in some of these international tours. Now, there's something we're calling Fanika Chain. Again, this is still theoretical. And Fanika is formed from 2 words. F is financial. Anika is Swahili, meaning expose. There's something going on within our African economies that's a bit troubling. If you look at some of the suppliers of some of the big chains like Nakumatt went down owing some of these small businesses over 2-3 million shillings. People will tell you about groups that they're creating, that they're trying to figure out how to help some of these families, because in Africa, if you're middle class and you lose 2 million, that's wiped you out. A lot of these large, medium-sized corporations, it may not be out of choice. It depends on the situations, but there are situations that they're putting small businesses to such hard times that they're supplying things and then not being paid on time, or it is taking extremely long to get the payment, or sometimes the payment never comes. And we want to try and figure out a way to be able to prevent this so that small businesses can take the risk with some information behind them. Because if I know that this company has a bad rating in terms of paying, then I won't take a loan to supply them. I'd rather take a smaller project, deliver on that, and then maybe use some of my proceeds to supply them a small portion and let them pay me fast. But where they're not getting this information, they are taking much larger risks, and it's leading to more businesses collapsing. So we want to build a platform that's going to record information and record things like reputation scores, use oracles to collect financial data. And some of this you can realize is also, if you look at the catch we have like in insurance. So in the early 60s and 70s, insurance agents in Kenya could get money directly from the customers, collect that money, then send it to insurance companies. However, the government changed that law because what some unscrupulous agents were doing, they would disappear with that money, and which means that if you've paid for insurance, your insurance company never got that money. So the law changed so that the customer pays the insurance company direct, but it's the same problem. The agents now are the ones who are ending up being paid late. So there needs to be some sort of system where we can start creating solutions across industries like that, and we can get agents and insurance companies paid at the same time, which means that the customer gets what they needed, but also the person who's doing the selling for the insurance companies gets their money when it's required. So this would then provide us with things like automated smart contract payments. There needs to be some level of data protection and token rewards for people who are paying early, but key information for small businesses so that they don't go broke. There's something I call corporate pivot. Now, if you think about a big company that has a 20 or 30 person sales team, their budget already is running to maybe $20 million in terms of what they pay that whole team every month. So if they try to produce a small, tiny new product that right now has zero consumers, the chances are is that they're going to spend so much in 1 year that usually those projects can't get lifted. But most large corporates are in a situation where products are starting to saturate. And it's not just large organizations, even for people like influencers, they're getting to a point where they're saturating the market because there's so many of them. And now AI has even introduced influencers that don't need to sleep, don't have a bad hair day, don't need to wash their faces, and can outcompete you in almost anything. So they need to start thinking about new markets and what they can do about them. So corporate pivot looks at creating small teams that are also using things like blockchain technologies and will allow these corporates or these other businesses to look at how to create a small market and be able to grow that small market with a small business of maybe a team of 2 or 3 people or 4, and you target them to grow to 500 users, then 1,000. So if you make it to 10,000 users, they could reabsorb this sub-unit of theirs. If they don't, and it only does 1,000, it's still a startup you've created, a startup of 3 people with 1,000 customers paying like $100 every month. That's more or less enough revenue to keep them running as a small business for quite a decent amount of time. So this is something we're looking at implementing. We're already talking to about 1 or 2 companies about some things that we can do, and we might see in 2024, depending on where this discussion goes. I've mentioned about fractional farming, and where I want to add here again, there's some old thinking that farmers are not educated. This is why they don't have good farming methods. I'll let you guys know for free that most of these farmers are much better educated than we are. Because if you think about who rural farmers are, they're the people who used to work in towns. All the guys who are studying and going for degrees and PhDs, now they're retired. So they went home. So their problem is not a lack of education. Their problem is managing risk. What happens to you when you've retired? You go home with a lump sum of 2 to 3 million shillings. So you have a fixed amount. But remember, there are 3 generations now that depend on you, because your grandkids are not making as much money as you used to, neither as your children. And these 2 generations will still need to pull some of the resources that you have. So you've got a limited amount. So what's going to happen in that situation is they will not experiment. They'll plant the same thing that everybody has always planted. And it doesn't help because you have 100 farmers in one location and all of them have grown maize, and it was a fantastic harvest. So the prices are going to drop. And if everyone had a bad time, there's no maize to sell anywhere. And the chances are then you're going to get starvation. So we need to start looking at how we can improve some of these practices, not just with blockchain technology, but even from things like crowdfunding, and maybe then layering or trying to get these farmers to hive different quarters where they grow different things or rotate them so that they're not killing themselves with producing too much of the same thing or not producing enough of what they require. The next thing I'd like to talk about is, as I said, my main focus is within the African story. And for those of you who might know a little history, you might know about African prophets. They were called prophets, they were called seers, and even in some of the more well-known movies, like Shaka Zulu, he had an advisor who'd keep telling about things. So there's a period in time where all of these seers started talking about the metal snake, a metal snake that breathes fire. Now, if you live in Africa, the snakes you have might not be as bad as what you have in the Amazon, but they're relatively big. So if you're being told that now that thing you see every day, it's bigger, it's metallic, and it even has a hole on its head, it's breathing fire, you can imagine the horror that's put in their minds. And this brings about fear, but it's fear coming from a lack of understanding. And I believe that that's a problem where we are taking both blockchain and AI right now. We don't understand them, so we are scared about what they'll do. Yes, it's going to change our lives, but what I keep telling people is what is happening right now with AI. Human beings have created tools to aid in their lives for hundreds and thousands of years. For the very first time, we have now become that tool that is being refashioned because AI is scaling the human being. So it's not something to be fearful about. It is something to get to understand where everything is going. And even for developers, what I keep telling them is you're going to go into a world where in the 1990s, I would code across 7, 8 different industries. That kind of coding is gone. Now you're going to be coding skins, and you'll be doing programmable skins for one game and just creating variations across a limited amount of code. That's because AI is doing most of the heavy lifting. So the human ingenuity is where you'll need to operate into. I think it'll make your life easier because it means the day and age of coding, sleeping 2 days in 1 week to get complex programs working, that is dying away. But it's going to be a new world that we need to shift to. But most of all, for the people also who are spending time taking away their children's playtime and teaching them programming languages, that's not a good idea. You can teach them programming concepts, but programming languages, the chances are by the time they are 18, those languages won't be used anymore, or they'll be historical things. So we need to be careful about the iron snake. Now, I'll finish up with this and just talk about one of the things that we're trying to do under creative operations. So we've seen all the examples of things we can implement across Africa. And going back to what we were discussing about the fear of young people. So what do we want to do here? We are being very hopeful, and that's what being a startup is all about. What we hope is that we'll be able to use blockchain and Web3 to automate startup creation, starting in Kenya and expanding to African countries within the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. It's a big hope, but we believe we can get there because the technology is already there for us to build, and we just need to get these guys into one system. So we've come up with a way to, first gamify startup development so that it's not boring. It's not what people tell you need to have a 3-page document and you have this. No, we are gamifying it so it's fun and you're coming to build something that's fun. And on top of that, we don't need you to have an idea. You'll come in and build your idea as you go along. Then we introduce 3 levels of investment, which makes it very clear to you that the first level of investment is your family. If you can't convince your family to put $500 into what you're trying to do, there's no way you're going to encourage a VC to put in $50,000. So you need to start being able to talk to your family, then move to the community. Who are your market? And if your market believes in what you're doing, they'll take an extra 1,000 shillings each and put it up to help you out. Then finally, VCs and angels would come at a point where they see that there's potential to grow this thing to another level, and they can take it and grow it. So our interest is not to create the next billion-dollar company. It's to create the next small, medium-sized business, which can service its community by focusing on a specific problem. And the targeted market will then be unemployed, people in the wrong jobs. And then we want to look at how we can use the same platform to be able to create an impact. Every single year, we're being told the starvation in Northeastern. Every single year, we know it's going to happen next year and the next. Why can't we come up with a way to solve that once and for all? We've got excess food. If you go to central Kenya, part of the problems that these farmers have is that you've got vegetables getting spoiled in their farms because they can't get rid of them. All it needs is someone to transport those vegetables to Northeastern to get someone to feed them. They may have an excess of cattle. You push that across the other way. It might need some level of government regulation and understanding, but these are things that we can do without too much thinking. It's stuff that's easy to implement. So this is one of my first talks in a very long time. I want to try and spend most of my free time talking, writing, and helping build people understand blockchain and Web3. And the hope is that as I try and make it less a mystery, then more people can adopt it and begin using it. So the whole issue of decentralized finance, there are so many levels that we can use them. But if you think about even not just within blockchain, if you look at companies like, God, I've forgotten the name. But if you look at some of the business models that are being used, so things like coffee companies that are basically giving you points, and those points can be changed into money. These are actually financial institutions. The thing is that the banks and the governments may not know it yet, but when they realize it, the problem of what they do usually is shut them down. But it means that even small businesses that provide rewards platforms are going to be some sort of financial institutions, because it depends on your product. If your product is not too expensive to create, then you're accumulating an excess of money. Because if you think about coffee, whether I make 2 cups or 5, it's like the same cost. So it's not a large cost to you, which means any extra money being paid on these, which is not utilized, is free money that you're able to store. So there's a new paradigm coming up for all that. And I think DeFi is going to be key for all of us. Blockchain is going to be a big key for all of us. Right now, we are focused on, I would call the cowboy stage, where everybody's looking at cryptos and exchanges, but there's more to this technology than just that. And we need to start focusing on how we can start fixing problems within Africa, because I believe through that, we'll be able to move on to the next couple of years as a strong nation and as a strong people. So I'd like to say thank you for giving me your time today, and we can have a small Q&A.
Thank you so much, Fabian, for your presentation. I've learned a lot about blockchain. I didn't know we can do so much with blockchain. So for the folks in the audience, feel free to leave your questions in the chat or in the Q&A tab. Fabian is happy to answer them in the next few minutes. So I have 3 questions on the Q&A tab. So the first one is, given that non-technical folks might find blockchain complicated, how do innovators get through to them?
Okay, in terms of how to get through to non-technical people, as I said, one of the problems with techies is when they build solutions for themselves, they're going to build all these things. And you'll realize right now, even as we've been talking, smart contracts are not really that smart, but we've used the term smart. So as a techie, what you have to do, and what I try to do, is make the explanation easy. Don't worry about the technical detail. There's some key elements you need to understand. And once you understand it, then you can slowly read up on some of the more complex things and you'll get to know it. So even for some of the terms that might be a bit hard, I still struggle with saying but you understand, it's just that some of these terms are a bit difficult to grasp, but learn the basics of it, and then you slowly get to understand how it functions.
The next question is the African market ready for blockchain solutions, or is there a great opportunity for growth?
With new technologies, you're never ready, yeah? Because what happens is there's one crazy guy somewhere in the world who goes and builds this thing nobody wanted or expected. Then as we start interacting with it, you find, oh, this is the thing we actually need. That's how innovation works. It's not, you're never ready for it. It's just, you have a need and it's something that's been bothering you. Then someone comes up with a solution and now you're able to use it and understand what it is. So I don't think it's about readiness. It's about where we can implement it and where people can start seeing the use for them. And I think that is always there. Africa always has problems. So whether you think of any problem that Africa is having right now, we can implement human beings, technology, and communication to it, and and we can get a solution.
Yeah. The next question is there another way blockchain and data science interact apart from their reliance or use of data?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but I'll try my best to answer it. So is there any way blockchain and data science interact apart from the reliance and use of data? So any system you build has some key things we call CRUD, right? So saving, deleting, writing, reporting, that's a basis of any database system. Then with data science, what you're usually doing is collecting this data and analyzing it. So there's always a connection when you're using technology that's built on databases, whatever database is it, whether it's centralized or decentralized, that's going to be storing data that then we need to analyze. And blockchain can do all this. As I said, the challenge that blockchain faces is that because it can't pick real world data, that already is being solved, and it's actually solved. The oracles exist. There are people implementing oracles for all sorts of things. So you can pick all sorts of data now and store it within the blockchain. So the connection between analyzing the oracles are what is going to help you analyze, and oracles also are quite complex. So it's something we can cover within a whole sort of lesson in itself. So I'd say, yeah, the data connection is there and will always be there because both systems sort of use data that they really need to analyze and sort out.
Yeah, I think that is well answered. The next question is several projects and ideas are wonderful involving open source and community. Congratulations. From what I understand, the idea of using blockchain is a secure infrastructure for the products of entrepreneurs in communities. Assuming that not everyone is ready to use this, what is the plan to train and equip those interested to use these solutions in addition to financial support?
Okay, so the people who really need training for blockchain technology, I'd say, were developers, because if a solution is implemented well for the end user, that rural woman who needs to reduce to gain her 4 hours every day, what we're doing for her is eliminating that need for her to walk to the river and back. She doesn't need to even know she's interacting with blockchain. She might at some point hear it, but if it's implemented right, for her, it means the water is coming straight to my house. That's the implementation of blockchain she has, even if she's got solar panels and all sorts of things around her. So the technologists are the ones who need to understand the complexity, but there's also development that's happening within blockchain. So there's something called layering. So we're creating different layers of blockchain so that the higher layers are going to be easier to interact and use. And when you look at also things like smart contract wallets, it's being made so that the end user doesn't need to interact with the complexity of what is a blockchain. So you'll have people at the lower level who deal with everything. Think of it this way: it is like assembly, and I mean, not many people know what assembly programming language is because they don't use. We know about machine code and AI because it's become popular now, but not many people know that there's a whole programming languages that you can burn circuits with and do all sorts of things with. They deal at visual level. So I think even for blockchain, that will take the same progressional path. But the key thing about innovations is, and why people adopt things to scale, you've built it for them so that it works just well, and they don't need to worry about the underlying technology.
Okay. The last question is where is a good place to start as a newbie in blockchain?
Um, it's like swimming. Just throw yourself in the pool, try and stay on the shallow end, and then you progress to the deep end. But I'd say understand what the concept is. And then after you've understood what the concept is, then go back and read the white paper and the history of why it came along. And especially if you want to do it at the level of where it's a passionate thing. And once you get to those two, then you can start delving into some of the deeper parts. So you could do it as a hobby horse level where you're just learning about blockchain and what it's doing. Then once you do the theory, you'll be able to look at the history. Then you can come back to the theory and you do it in small parts so you can research and read about it. So like for me, it's not that I know everything. So the reason why I'm writing is because I go and read up on something, then I summarize it as a written document, and that helps me remember. Then I post it somewhere and share it with people. So just do it bit by bit. But you'll find there's so much information out there about blockchain. What you need to be careful about is the scammy information. So focus on the technology. Don't get too excited about super investments that will make you a millionaire tomorrow and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we have another question. I think the last one now. So for an upcoming data analyst, would you say having some knowledge on oracles would be essential when dealing with blockchain technologies in the future?
Yes, I'd say it's good for you to start knowing what they can do and not do, because especially for you data analysts, between oracles and AI, that's going to be your competition in the future. Oracles are basically collecting real world data, analyzing it, and sending it back to the blockchain. That's sort of what you do, yeah, outside of the blockchain. So this is going to be your future competition. You need to know how to harness these tools. You need to know how your jobs are going to change based on these tools as opposed to just fearing them. So future data analysts might be holding ones that they run around with and collect temperature variables and then decide that they need to feed this data back to something automated. But approach it not with fear, as I said. Just learn about them and then start seeing where you can fit in. And I believe the future gets better. The future gets better with these technologies.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fabian, for your presentation. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. We have a lot of emojis there, love hearts,
Okay.
and people are really
Thank you.
enjoyed your talk. Thank you for making it simple, like giving us real world examples where blockchain can be applied. Nicholas says thank you for an enlightening experience. So everyone, thank you for joining. We'll have our recording ready and it will be up on our YouTube channel in the next 24 to 48 hours. Thank you so much, Fabian.
Okay. Most welcome.